I think executive clemency is a misunderstood concept, and I'd like to share what I have learned about executive clemency with as many people as possible. I'm Michael Santos, and I was in prison for 26 years. And since getting out of prison, I've worked to try and spread as much awareness to as many people as possible about steps that they can take to start positioning themselves for the best possible outcome. And for many, the best possible outcome would be a pursuit of executive clemency. The reality, however, is that somebody has to start building a pathway toward executive clemency very early. And one thing I want to talk about with executive clemency are there are different types. So in this video, I'm going to explain those different types of executive clemency, and then I'm going to share with you what I learned from interviewing subject matter experts on executive clemency. And I will also offer some suggestions on what people can do to position themselves for executive clemency if that's what they want. So let's start off with a basic definition of what it is, right? The most important one, or the most valuable one to a lot of people, is people want to get out of prison. That's called a commutation of sentence. Now, a commutation of sentence can happen before the person surrenders. As an example, we could think of Scooter Libby, whom President Bush, the second President Bush, he commuted his sentence before Scooter Libby had to go to prison. He did not pardon Scooter Libby. He only commuted the sentence, which stopped him from having to stand up for count. There's a lot of people in federal prison that would like to get a commutation of sentence, but they need to be thinking about, how do I do that? And we'll discuss that a little bit later in this video and in the accompanying blog that I write that will provide links to this information that I'm talking about. So executive clemency includes a commutation of sentence, which effectively means the president can cut a sentence short or stop a person from even going to prison, but it doesn't forgive the offense. So that's a big difference, okay? We're going to talk about how to pursue it in a little bit later. Another form of executive clemency is the pardon. The pardon is the President of the United States has the power to pardon anybody convicted of a federal law. And I'm limiting this discussion, although executive clemency applies to all criminal justice system. I'm limiting this to the federal system. So a pardon in the federal system is effectively a forgiveness of the offense or moving on. It doesn't mean the offense never occurred. It means that the president, and he's the only person, the president is the only position that has the authority to pardon somebody. When the president pardons an individual, they're effectively forgiving the offense, and it can restore civil liberty rights. So that is a different form of executive clemency. We'll talk about how to apply in just a few moments. Another form of executive clemency is amnesty. The most popular case that I know of with regard to amnesty was Jimmy Carter, who granted amnesty to everybody who left the United States because they were opposed to the Vietnam War. So instead of being drafted into the military, they left to Canada or to some other country, and an outstanding warrant went out for their arrest until President Carter granted executive clemency, an amnesty order for anybody who was charged with that offense. So that's a third form of executive clemency. Another form of executive clemency is a remission of the fine. I think there's another one. These are less common, by the way. A remission of the fine, and also one that postpones a sentence for some type of reason. Maybe the person needs to get health care or something along those lines, or do something. The president has the authority to either push the sentence back or pull a person out of prison so they can get the procedure done and then go back to finish the sentence, right? The president just has broad authority on what he can do in that role. And I think it's in Article 2 of the United States Constitution. I studied a lot of this while I was in prison because I was serving a 45-year sentence, and I was very much interested in executive clemency. But of course, it was a very different era when I went to prison than it is today. I started serving my sentence in 1987, and I finished in 2013. And although I filed for executive clemency, a commutation of sentence, at least 3 times, I was denied every time. Because again, it was a different era. Now it's not quite the same. And let's turn now our attention to how does somebody pursue executive clemency. And I'm filming this on the 4th of July, 2025, because this is a day about liberty. This is a day about independence. And I'm a big believer that we incarcerate more people than any place on any other country, and people serve sentences that are far too long. So we have a lot of people in prison who should not be in prison, and they should be thinking about using executive clemency as a potential vehicle to advance their liberty. But how does one do it? Well, anybody can visit Justice.gov. It is a website that the government maintains, and type in there executive clemency. And you will see applications for the two different types of clemency, primarily a pardon or a commutation. Those are statements that you can apply to receive. And so the forms are really quite simple. You don't need a lawyer, right? You could do this on your own, but what you do need is a little backstory, a little background knowledge on what to do. So you want to fill out all the documents. And in order to fill out those documents, you have to know what's going to happen. And you should also gather the documents that you are going to need to advance your petition. One of those documents would be your pre-sentence investigation report. That will provide a lot of the information, such as your case number, the name of your judge, the district where you were charged or convicted, the way that the government has described your role in the offense, what were the charges that you faced. All of that information typically is in your pre-sentence investigation report. And although you cannot get that while you're in federal prison and keep it in your possession, you could ask the case manager to make copies of pertinent matters that will align with your petition for clemency. But once you fill out the forms, you gather all the information, you fill out the forms, the next step in the formal process is to submit it to the Office of the United States Pardon Attorney. That's as an office. It's operated by the Department of Justice. It's staffed typically by civil attorneys that work for the Department of Justice. Frequently, many of them have built their careers as prosecutors. And this is not my information alone. I got this from an interview I did with a fellow by the name of Sam Morrison, who used to work in the Pardon Attorney's office. And in the blog itself, I will provide a link to a podcast I did with him so that you could hear him providing me with this information. I always make 3 promises, remember, to people in our community. I'm never going to lie to you. I'm never going to ask you to do anything that I didn't do. And I'm never going to charge anybody a penny. No, you don't have to pay anybody to help you with your clemency petition. But you do have to know the work that is going to go into getting it done. So after you've gathered all the information you needed, you've prepared all of the documents that are necessary, you would submit it to the Office of the Pardon Attorney. Now, historically, the Office of the Pardon Attorney would not consider a pardon unless the person has been out of prison for at least 5 years. He's completed his obligation to the Bureau of Prisons and 5 years have passed. That is the policy that's going to be on the Department of Justice's website. And you're going to read a lot about that if you start researching this. However, under this administration, President Trump has never been one to follow precedent. He makes his own policies. And if he decides that an injustice has been done, he takes action. And you will see that numerous times that he's granted pardons to people who didn't even surrender to prison, much less have 5 years after. He's granted pardons to people who didn't even apply. He's granted pardons to people that he believes shouldn't be in prison. So under the President Trump's administration, the policies that you're going to see on the Department of Justice aren't always necessary. In fact, he has gone to really extraordinary, created some new extraordinary policies, such as appointing Alice Johnson as what's called the pardon czar. And the pardon czar is going to review these applications before the president gets them and make a recommendation probably before it goes to the pardons office. And the cool thing about that is that Alice Johnson herself was once serving a multi-decade sentence in federal prison. She got a pardon from President Trump during the first administration. I think she got a commutation and then a pardon. And now she's the pardon czar. So there's a lot of history about changes in the system that can absolutely apply to you. But let's talk a little bit more about it. Still, we should talk about the formal process. After somebody submits a form to the U.S. pardon attorney, the next step, according to what I learned from Sam Morrison, is the pardon attorney's office will send this application to the FBI. And the FBI will begin to investigate this petition just to make sure everything is accurate. They're going to reach out. You should expect them to reach out to your prosecutor. And the prosecutor, they will ask the prosecutor, what position do you take on this application? You should expect the FBI to reach out to your sentencing judge and seek information on what's the judge's position. You should expect the FBI to reach out to your probation officer, the one who did your PSR, and get his take on it. They may reach out to the Bureau of Prisons and get their take on it. They may do a complete new investigation based on the information on your pre-sentence investigation report. So you should expect that information. And the one certainty is you should not lie on your petition. You make sure that you're doing everything within your power to prepare.